Damn, a Book of Calumny, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Damn, a Book of Calumny, by H.L. Mencken. 1. Pater Patriae. If George Washington were alive today, what a shining mark he would be for the whole camorra of uplifters, forward-lookers, and professional patriots. He was the Rockefeller of his time, the richest man in the United States, a promoter of stock companies, a land-grabber, an exploiter of mines and timber. He was a bitter opponent of foreign alliances, and denounced their evils in harsh, specific terms. He had a liking for all forthright and pugnacious men, and a contempt for lawyers, schoolmasters, and all other such obscurantists. He was not pious. He drank whiskey whenever he felt chilly, and kept a jug of it handy. He knew far more profanity than Scripture, and used and enjoyed it more. He had no belief in the infallible wisdom of the common people, but regarded them as inflammatory dolts, and tried to save the Republic from them. He advocated no sure cure for all the sorrows of the world, and doubted that such a panacea existed. He took no interest in the private morals of his neighbors. Inhabiting these states today, George would be ineligible for any office of honor or profit. The Senate would never dare confirm him. The President would not think of nominating him. He would be on trial in all the yellow journals for belonging to the invisible government, the hellhounds of plutocracy, the money power, the interests. The Sherman Act would have him in its toils. He would be under indictment by every grand jury south of the Potomac. The triumphant prohibitionists of his native state would be denouncing him. He had a still at Mount Vernon, as a debaucher of youth, a recruiting officer for insane asylums, a poisoner of the home. The suffragettes would be on his trail, with sentinels posted all along the Accotink road. The initiators and referendors would be bawling for his blood. The young college men of the nation and the new republic would be lecturing him weekly. He would be used to scare children in Kansas and Arkansas. The Chautauquas would shiver whenever his name was mentioned. And what a chance there would be for that ambitious young district attorney who thought to shadow him on his peregrinations and grab him under the Mann Act.
Ch2 The Reward of the Artist. A man labors and fumes for a whole year to write a symphony in G minor. He puts enormous diligence into it, and much talent, and maybe no little downright genius. It draws his blood and wrings his soul. He dies in it that he may live again. Nevertheless, its final value, in the open market of the world, is a great deal less than that of a fur overcoat, half a Rolls-Royce automobile, or a handful of authentic hair from the whiskers of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. 3. The Heroic Considered. For humility and poverty in themselves, the world has little liking and less respect. In the folklore of all races, despite the sentimentalization of abasement for dramatic effect, it is always power and grandeur that count in the end. The whole point of the story of Cinderella, the most widely and constantly charming of all stories, is that the fairy prince lifts Cinderella above her cruel sisters and stepmother, and so enables her to lord it over them. The same idea underlies practically all other folk stories. The essence of each of them is to be found in the ultimate triumph and exultation of its protagonist. And of the real men and women of history, the most venerated and envied are those whose early humiliations were but preludes to terminal glories. For example, Lincoln, Whittington, Franklin, Columbus, Demosthenes, Frederick the Great, Catherine, Mary of Magdala, Moses. Even the Man of Sorrows, cradled in a manger and done to death between two thieves, is seen, as we part from him at last, in a situation of stupendous magnificence, with infinite power in his hand. Even the Beatitudes, in the midst of their eloquent counseling of renunciation, give it unimaginable splendor as its reward. The meek shall inherit, what? The whole earth. And the poor in spirit, they shall sit upon the right hand of God. 4. The burden of humor. What is the origin of the prejudice against humor? Why is it so dangerous, if you would keep the public confidence, to make the public laugh? Is it because humor and sound sense are essentially antagonistic? Has humanity found by experience that the man who sees the fun of life is unfitted to deal sanely with its problems? I think not. No man had more of the comic spirit in him than William Shakespeare, and yet his serious reflections, by the sheer force of their sublime obviousness, have pushed their way into the race's arsenal of immortal platitudes. So, too, with Aesop, and with Balzac, and with Dickens, to come down the scale. All of these men were fundamentally humorists, and yet all of them achieved what the race has come to accept as a penetrating sagacity. Contrariwise, many a haloed pundit has had his occasional guffaw. Lincoln, had there been no Civil War, might have survived in history chiefly as the father of the American smutty story, the only original art form that America has yet contributed to literature. Huxley, had he not been the greatest intellectual duelist of his age, might have been its greatest satirist. Bismarck, pursuing the gruesome trade of politics, concealed the devastating wit of a Molière. His surviving epigrams are truly stupendous. And Beethoven, after soaring to the heights of tragedy in the first movement of the Fifth Symphony, turned to the sardonic bull-fiddling of the Scherzo. No, there is not the slightest disharmony between sense and nonsense, humor and respectability, despite the skittish tendency to assume that there is. But why, then, that widespread error? What actual fact of life lies behind it, giving it a specious appearance of reasonableness? None other, I am convinced, than the fact that the average man is far too stupid to make a joke. He may see a joke and love a joke, particularly when it floors and flabbergasts some person he dislikes, but the only way he can himself take part in the priming and pointing of a new one is by acting as its target. In brief, his personal contact with humor tends to fill him with an accumulated sense of disadvantage, of pricked complacency, of sudden and crushing defeat. And so, by an easy psychological process, he is led into the idea that the thing itself is incompatible with true dignity of character and intellect. Hence, his deep suspicion of jokers, however adept their thrust. What a damned fool! This same half-pitying tribute he pays to wit and butt alike. He cannot separate the virtuoso of comedy from his general concept of comedy itself, and that concept is inextricably mingled with memories of foul ambuscades and mortifying hurts, and so it is not often that he is willing to admit any wisdom in a humorist, or to condone frivolity in a sage. 5. The saving grace. Let us not burn the universities yet. After all, the damage they do might be worse. Suppose Oxford had snared and disemboweled Shakespeare. Suppose Harvard had set its stamp upon Mark Twain. 6. Moral indignation. The loud, preposterous moral crusades that so endlessly rock the Republic, against the rum demon, against Sunday baseball, against Sunday moving pictures, against dancing, against fornication, against the cigarette, against all things sinful and charming. These astounding Methodist jihads offer fat clinical material to the student of mobocracy. In the long run, nearly all of them must succeed, for the mob is eternally virtuous, and the only thing necessary to get it in favor of some new and super-oppressive law is to convince it that the law will be distasteful to the minority that it envies and hates. The poor numbskull, who is so horribly harrowed by Puritan pulpit thumpers that he can't go to a ball game on Sunday afternoon without dreaming of hell and the devil all Sunday night, is naturally envious of the fellow who can, and, being envious of him, he hates him and is eager to destroy his offensive happiness. The farmer, who works 18 hours a day and never gets a day off, is envious of his farmhand, who goes to the crossroads and barrels up on Saturday afternoon. Hence the virulence of prohibition among the peasantry. The hard-working householder, who on some bitter evening glances over the Saturday Evening Post for a square and honest look at his wife, is envious of those gaudy drummers who go gallivanting about the country with scarlet girls. Hence the Mann Act. If these deviltries were equally open to all men, and all men were equally capable of appreciating them, their unpopularity would tend to wither. I often think, indeed, that the prohibitionist tub-thumpers make a tactical mistake in dwelling too much upon the evils and horrors of alcohol, and not enough upon its delights. A few enlarged photographs of first-class bar-rooms, showing the rows of well-fed, well-dressed babouli happily moored to the brass rails, their noses in fragrant mint and hops, and their hands reaching out for free rations of olives, pretzels, cloves, pumpernickel, Bismarck herring, anchovies, Swartenmagen, wieners, Smithfield ham, and dill pickles. Such a gallery of contentment would probably do far more execution among the dismal Shudra than all the current portraits of drunkards' livers. To vote for prohibition in the face of the liver portraits means to vote for the good of the other fellow. For even the oldest bibulomaniac always thinks that he himself will escape. This is an act of altruism almost impossible to the mob man, whose selfishness is but little corrupted by the imagination that shows itself in his betters. His most austere renunciations represent no more than a matching of the joys of indulgence against the pains of hell. Religion to him is little more than synthesized fear. I venture that many a vote for prohibition comes from gentlemen who look longingly through swinging doors and pass on, in propitiation of Satan and their alert consorts, the lake of brimstone and the corrective broomstick. 7. Stable names. Why doesn't some patient drudge of a Privatdozent compile a dictionary of the stable names of the great? All show dogs and racehorses, as everyone knows, have stable names. On the list of entries, a fast mare may appear as Tsarina Ogla Fedorovna, but in the stable she is not that at all, nor even Tsarina or Olga, but maybe Lil or Jenny. And a prize bulldog, champion Zoroaster or Charlemagne XI on the bench, may be plain Jack or Ponto in famille. So with celebrities of the genus Homo. Huxley's official style and appellation was the Right Honorable Thomas Henry Huxley, P.C., M.D., Ph.D., L.D., D.C.L., D.Sc., F.R.S., and his biographer tells us that he delighted in its rolling grandeur, but to his wife he was always Hal. Shakespeare, to his fellows of his Bankside, was Will, and perhaps Willie to Anne Hathaway. The Kaiser is another Willie. The late Tsar so addressed him in their famous exchange of telegrams. The Tsar himself was Nicky in those days, and no doubt remains Nicky to his intimates today. Edgar Allan Poe was always Eddie to his wife, and Mark Twain was always Youth to his. P.T. Barnum's stable name was Taylor, his middle name. Charles Lamb's was Guy. Nietzsche's was Fritz. Whistler's was Jimmy. The late King Edward's was Bertie. Grover Cleveland's was Steve. J. Pierpont Morgan's was Jack. Dr. Wilson's is Tom. Some given names are surrounded by a whole flotilla of stable names. Henry, for example, is softened variously into Harry, Hen, Hank, Hal, Henry, Enery, Honry, and Heiny. Which did Anne Boleyn use when she cooed into the suspicious ear of Henry VIII? To which did Henrik Ibsen answer at the domestic hearth? It is difficult to imagine his wife calling him Henrik. The name is harsh, clumsy, razor-edged. But did she make it Hen or Rick or neither? What was Bismarck to the Fürsten, and to the mother he so vastly feared? Otkin? Somehow it seems impossible. What was Grant to his wife? Surely not Ulysses. And Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart? And Rutherford B. Hayes? Was Robert Browning ever Bob? Was John Wesley ever Jack? Was Emanuel Swedenborg ever Manny? Was Tadeusz Kosciuszko ever Teddy? A fair field of inquiry invites. Let some laborious assistant professor explore and chart it. There will be more of human nature in his report than in all the novels ever written. 8. The Jews. The Jews, like the Americans, labor under a philosophical dualism, and in both cases it is a theological heritage. On the one hand, there is the idealism that is lovely and uplifting and will get a man into heaven. And on the other hand, there is the realism that works. The fact that the Jews cling to both, thus running, as it were, upon two tracks, is what makes them so puzzling now and then to the Goyim. In one aspect, they stand for the most savage practicality, In another aspect, they are dreamers of an almost fabulous otherworldliness. My own belief is that the essential Jew is the idealist, that his occasional flashing of hyena teeth is no more than a necessary concession to the harsh demands of the struggle for existence. Perhaps, in many cases, it is due to an actual corruption of blood. The Jews come from the Levant, and their women were exposed for many centuries to the admiration of Greek, Arab, and Armenian. The shark that a Jew can be at his worst is simply a Greek or Armenian at his best. As a statement of post-mortem and superterrestrial fact, the religion that the Jews have foisted upon the world seems to me to be as vast a curse as the influenza that we inherit from the Tartars, or the democratic fallacies set afloat by the French Revolution. The one thing that can be said in favor of it is that it is not true, and yet we suffer from it almost as much as if it were true. But with it, encasing it and preserving it, there has come something that is positively valuable, something indeed that is beyond all price, and that is Jewish poetry. To compare it to the poetry of any other race is wholly impossible. It stands completely above all the rest. It is as far beyond the next best as German music is beyond French music, or French painting beyond English painting, or the English drama beyond the Italian drama. There are single chapters in the Old Testament that are worth all the poetry ever written in the New World, and 9/10 of that written in the Old. The Jews of those ancient days had imagination. They had dignity. They had ears for sweet sound. They had, above all, the faculty of grandeur. The stupendous music that issued from them has swept their barbaric demonology along with it, setting at naught the collective intelligence of the human species. They embalmed their idiotic taboos and fetishes in undying strains, and so gave them some measure of the same immortality. A race of lawgivers? Bosh! Leviticus is as archaic as the Code of Manu, and the Decalogue is a fossil. A race of seers? Bosh again! The God they saw survives only as a bogeyman, a theory, an uneasy and vexatious ghost. A race of traders and sharpers? Bosh a third time! The Jews are as poor as the Spaniards. But a race of poets, my lords, a race of poets. It is a vision of beauty that has ever haunted them, and it has been their destiny to transmit that vision, enfeebled perhaps, but still distinct, to other and lesser peoples, that life might be made softer for the sons of men, and the goodness of the Lord God, whoever he may be, might not be forgotten. 9. The Comstockian premise. It is argued against certain books, by virtuosi of moral alarm, that they depict vice as attractive. This recalls the king who hanged a judge for deciding that an archbishop was a mammal.
10. Labial infamy. After 5 years of search, I have been able to discover but one book in English upon the art of kissing, and that is a very feeble treatise by a savant of York, Pennsylvania, Dr. R. McCormick Sturgeon. There may be others, but I have been quite unable to find them. Kissing, for all one hears of it, has not attracted the scientists and literati. One compares its meager literature with the endless books upon the other phenomena of love, especially divorce and obstetrics. Even Dr. Sturgeon, pioneering bravely, is unable to get beyond a sentimental and trivial view of the thing he vivisects, and so his book is no more than a compendium of mush. his very description of the act of kissing is made up of sonorous gabble about heaving bosoms, red lips, electric sparks, and such like imaginings. What reason have we for believing, as he says, that the lungs are strongly expanded during the act? My own casual observation inclines me to hold that the opposite is true, that the lungs are actually collapsed in a pseudo-asthmatic spasm. Again, what is the ground for arguing that the lips are full, ripe, and red? The real effect of the emotions that accompany kissing is to empty the superficial capillaries and so produce a leaden pallor. As for such salient symptoms as the temperature, the pulse, and the rate of respiration, the learned pundit passes them over without a word. Mrs. Elsie Clews Parsons would be a good one to write a sober and accurate treatise upon kissing. Her books upon the family and fear and conventionality indicate her possession of the right sort of learning. Even better would be a work by Havelock Ellis, say, in 3 or 4 volumes. Ellis has devoted his whole life to illuminating the mysteries of sex, and his collection of materials is unsurpassed in the world. Surely there must be an enormous mass of instructive stuff about kissing in his card indexes, letter files, book presses, and archives. Just why the kiss as we know it should have attained to its present popularity in Christendom is probably one of the things past finding out. The Japanese, a very affectionate and sentimental people, do not practice kissing in any form. They regard the act, in fact, with an aversion matching our own aversion to the rubbing of noses. Nor is it in vogue among the Moslems, nor among the Chinese, who countenance it only as between mother and child. Even in parts of Christendom it is girt about by rigid taboos, so that its practice tends to be restricted to a few occasions. Two Frenchmen or Italians, when they meet, kiss each other on both cheeks. One used to see, indeed, many pictures of General Joffre thus bussing the heroes of Verdun. There even appeared in print a story to the effect that one of them objected to the scratching of his mustache. But imagine 2 Englishmen kissing, or 2 Germans! As well imagine the former kissing the latter. Such a display of affection is simply impossible to men of northern blood. They would die with shame if caught at it. The Englishman, like the American, never kisses if he can help it. He even regards it as bad form to kiss his wife in a railway station, or, in fact, anywhere in sight of a third party. The Latin has no such compunctions. He leaps to the business regardless of place or time. His sole concern is with the lady. Once, in driving from Nice to Monte Carlo along the lower Corniche road, I passed 100 or so open taxicabs containing man and woman, and fully 75% of the men had their arms around their companions and were kissing them. These were not peasants, remember, but well-to-do persons. In England, such a scene would have caused a great scandal. In most American states, the police would have charged the offenders with drawn revolvers. The charm of kissing is one of the things I have always wondered at. I do not pretend, of course, that I have never done it. Mere politeness forces one to it. There are women who sulk and grow bellicose unless one at least makes the motions of kissing them. But what I mean is that I have never found the act a 10th part as agreeable as poets, the authors of musical comedy librettos, and, on the contrary side, chaperones and the gendarmerie make it out. The physical sensation, far from being pleasant, is intensely uncomfortable. A suspension of respiration, indeed, quickly resolves itself into a feeling of suffocation. And the posture necessitated by the approximation of lips and lips is unfailingly a constrained and ungraceful one. Theoretically, a man kisses a woman perpendicularly, with their eyes those windows of the soul synchronizing exactly. But actually, on account of the incompressibility of the nasal cartilages, he has to incline either his or her head to an angle of at least 60 degrees, and the result is that his right eye gazes insanely at the space between her eyebrows, while his left eye is fixed upon some vague spot behind her. An instantaneous photograph of such a maneuver, taken at the moment of incidence, would probably turn the stomach of even the most romantic man, and force him, in sheer self-respect, to renounce kissing as he has renounced leap-frog and walking on stilts. Only a woman, for women are quite devoid of aesthetic feeling, could survive so damning a picture. But the most embarrassing moment in kissing does not come during the actual kiss, for at that time the sensation of suffocation drives out all purely psychical feelings, but immediately afterward. What is one to say to the woman, then? The occasion obviously demands some sort of remark. One has just received, in theory, a great boon. The silence begins to make itself felt. There stands the fair one, obviously waiting. Is one to thank her? Certainly that would be too transparent a piece of hypocrisy, too flaccid a banality. Is one to tell her that one loves her? Obviously there is danger in such assurances, and beside, one usually doesn't, and a lie is a lie. Or is one to descend to chatty commonplaces about the weather, literature, politics, the war? The practical impossibility of solving the problem leads almost inevitably to a blunder far worse than any merely verbal one. One kisses her again, and then again, and so on, and so on. The ultimate result is satiety, repugnance, disgust. Even the girl herself gets enough. End of part 1.